Reserve Hurricane Hunters mission. The hunters were right there in the middle of Hurricane Florence, looking down on it, sending back data for us so we can keep you safe. And we're so thankful to both groups of hurricane hunters, the U.S. Air Force Reserve out of Biloxi, Mississippi, as well as the NOAA hurricane hunters out of Lakeland, Florida. So we're continuing to see both groups take their turns into Hurricane Florence, and as a matter of fact, we have a plane headed there right now, a NOAA plane. With winds of 140 miles per hour, Florence is a Category 4 with a central pressure unchanged from the last advisory at 946 millibars, and it moves toward the west-northwest at about 17 miles per hour. So there's Lakeland, Florida, and there's the position approximately of the NOAA Hurricane Hunter plane right off the coast of South Carolina. It will continue to fly its mission into Florence, crisscrossing, and as it does, measuring some upper level winds so we can find the steering currents, we can find the strength, and also dropping instruments called dropsondes down into the midst of the hurricane to get measurements. And so we'll continue to get these in as they do come in. Now, I want to show you something about the Air Force Hurricane Hunter plane. This is the WC-130J. You might ask, how could they do this? All right, they've got some very sophisticated equipment on board here. And one of these pieces of equipment that they use is called the Step Frequency Microwave Radiometer, or the SFMR. And it's located right under the plane's wing. And it's just amazing how this works, because the radiation is actually emitted from sea foam and bubbles here down below where the hurricane is. And what happens is the SFMR receives that radiation signal and then translates that into a wind speed that they can estimate from that gathered information. The more foam they get, the higher the wind speed. It's just amazing how somebody figured out that this would work. So, because of the hurricane hunters, we're able to get information that we can actually plug into the models to get a better forecast, and of course, update the position, update the current wind speed, update the central pressure in real time from the hunters, and we're so thankful that they help us out. And we're going to continue to use them, obviously, and use their information all the way through the weekend, Ray.
And Nick, another thing we'd have to worry about is the tornado threat as we watch Florence make its approach. Our hurricane concerns for hurricane force winds will be with us. But then what happens in landfalling hurricanes in the northeast quadrant is that you always have to watch for tornadoes. And with tornado threat, there's that opportunity to see weak EF0s, EF1s. Typically, that is what we do see when we do get landfalling tropical systems. So certainly look at that threat. I believe our Torcon's about a 3 out of 10, so a 30% chance of tornado in and around eastern North Carolina and on into parts of South Carolina, maybe even southeast Virginia also. So those Torcons remaining a little bit in the way of rather low, but it is typical, as you don't see widespread tornadoes typically in a landfalling hurricane, but you do typically see EF0s and EF1s. These are tropical tornadoes, 1950 to 2007. 49% of the time EF0s, 32% of the time EF1. And look at that on EF5s. It is rare to get a strong tornado. As you get up to EF5, 0%. Doesn't get any rarer than that. And then these are some of the things you need to know. Most associated with supercells occurs as the system comes on shore. They're typically weak. They're quick movers, too, shallow, short-lived, and then common in the northeast quadrant, where the land interaction does play a role. Well, now we want to answer questions about Florence. Many of you have been sending them via Twitter using the hashtag Hurricane Questions.
And here's one that we received, and this from Robert Richards. How does this storm compare to Hugo? There are some similarities.
Yeah, there are. 1989, and a lot of similarities I'm hearing from our radio affiliates in North Carolina about Hugo, Nick.
It was a 140 mile per hour hurricane on landfall here, a Category 4. We don't think Florence is going to be that strong at landfall.
Yeah, so it may be a Cat 3 and potentially a Cat 4, but one thing that was a big difference with Hugo is that we had a faster forward speed. So it came in and it moved along. And with this forecast here, there's a little bit more concern probably for a substantial onshore wind, throws surge threat, and then inland flooding.
Yeah. So there's still going to be a surge threat. There'll still be a wind threat, maybe not quite as great as Hugo, but the rainfall threat is probably going to be greater than Hugo, thus the flooding threat too.
Yeah, look at this. Maybe over 24 inches of rain in and around Wilmington. Now, obviously, this could shift by a few miles north or south, but then look at this area here in eastern South Carolina too. 12 to 18 inches of rain, Nick, and this is a little bit different from what Hugo did. This is a lot because of that forward speed right now at 17 miles per hour, slowing down, and some guidance even saying meandering or stalling close to the coast.
And of course, we can't really compare the exact track of Hugo to Florence because, the jury's still out on exactly where we might find landfall and it moving.
Yeah, and no hurricane is the same as any other one. They're all different.
Yeah.
And if you do have questions about Hurricane Florence, we want to hear from you.
Yeah, send us a tweet using the hashtag Hurricane Questions, and we'll answer them throughout the day. In the meantime, stay with us. We have much more on this monster hurricane.
You know, we actually really haven't had a hurricane in a long time. Not like a real hurricane, you know. So it's something new to me. This will be like my first major storm. A little anxious, yeah, but it'll be all right, you know, hunker down, get everything prepared.
Certainly reason to be anxious on the North South Carolina coast as Florence makes its approach. 2 a.m. advisory holding the winds at 140 miles per hour. So powerful Category 4 storm. Pressure holds steady from the advisory before that at 946 millibars and still moving west-northwest at 17. West-northwest and 17 is going to be the key to this forecast as we go on through the next few days. 625 miles southeast of Cape Fear in North Carolina. Hurricane warnings are up. They do get into parts of South Carolina. Hurricane watches further south, just north of Disto Beach. And even inland, we do have some tropical storm watches almost into Raleigh. Tropical storm watch means tropical storm conditions possible within the next 48 hours. Here's our latest guidance is suggesting. Now understand, intensity forecasting does a little bit better, especially in the longer range than track guidance. And that's why when we get out toward just before landfall and beyond, it becomes a little bit more tricky. And some changes trickling in with some new guidance suggesting maybe a track along the coast and a little further south, potentially even with where we see some of the warnings up, hurricane watches and warnings, and maybe even where the center comes on shore. As you can see here from the ensemble forecast track from a European model, the next 10 days. Pretty good agreement here, but notice now how we're starting to see a little skew further southwest, so that puts maybe the South Carolina coast a little bit more in play, and some of those models even going out as far south as southeast Georgia coast. And the bigger question will also become, what does it do once it gets inland? So where is that heavy rain going to set up also? So a lot remains to be seen. Pretty confident we do see a strengthening storm, possibly up to a 155, and then weakening a bit before it comes on shore, maybe as a strong Cat 3, possibly a Cat 4, and then possibly drifting down toward the southwest, really the longer range, Nick. There is a lot that remains to be unraveled here as some of that guidance suggesting now maybe a trek a little bit further to the southwest.
A lot of things to watch, including a lot of separate storms to watch here in the Atlantic Basin. We're nearing the heights of the hurricane season here in the Atlantic, and we are seeing 3 named storms out there, plus 1 invest area here in the Gulf of Mexico and a non-tropical low that could take on tropical characteristics there toward the north into the Atlantic. So here's one of the named storms, Tropical Storm Isaac. This is just making a beeline westward at about 16 miles per hour. 65 mile per hour winds right now, and this is going to take it right through the Lesser Antilles, we believe. Tropical storm warnings are up for the islands. Tropical storm watches up toward the northern islands. And the models take this pretty much straight westward, and then they diverge a little bit as we get into the Caribbean. But right now, our best guess is that we think the center of this is going to stay south of Puerto Rico, south of the island of Hispaniola, south of Cuba for the most part. But nevertheless, there could be some waves emanating out from Isaac that, of course, would batter the coastlines of all of those areas, of course, in heavy rainfall, too. Here's Invest 95L. This is an area that the National Hurricane Center has been watching, giving it a 70% chance of development over the next 5 days, a 50% chance of development over the next 48 hours. And this is the area that we expect it to develop. The Texas coastline needs to be aware of the potential threat from maybe even a named storm here, Joyce or Kirk, and heavy rainfall in areas that have already been receiving heavy rainfall just even now as we speak, overnight tonight. So flash flooding is going to be a big possibility here. Now we want to look toward the Pacific as well, Ray.
Yeah, Nick, and that's been a spot that's been active too. Right now in Maui, out in Hawaii, 76 degrees, all's calm, but impacts coming in from Tropical Storm Olivia are about to be felt here over the next 12 to 24 hours. It's not going to be a lane, and double-digit rain totals. 2-3 feet in some spots. I think we exceeded 40 inches, almost 50 inches on parts of the islands. We do have a tropical storm with winds at 50 miles per hour, moving southwest at 8. But notice here, if you can see where the swirl is, looks like the center is here. but all the thunderstorms and all the action are well to the east. So displaced from the center is where the thunderstorms are, but still, I think some squally weather as we go through the next 24 to 36 hours with heavy rain a threat, and certainly going to see some gusty winds also. But the tropical storm force, once again, you look a little closer, just starting to see now flare up on the east side, starting to see some thunderstorms. This is kind of just well off to the east, but either way, we are going to have some heavy rain come on in. That's why all the islands under a tropical storm warning within 24 hours, tropical storm conditions expected, and some heavy rain in spots, but not getting any totals here exceeding a half a foot, 3 to 5 inches, 2 to 3 inches around Honolulu. Now, somebody might have some localized totals greater than 5 inches, but it looks like an event big enough to cause flooding, but certainly not the catastrophic flooding we had with Lane, as all forecast guidance in agreement until it gets out over the open waters of the Pacific, that we are going to have a tropical storm that will most likely be weakening eventually to a depression as it gets out over the big blue open ocean of the Pacific. We'll have more coming up after the break.
We are in a very deadly and important game of chess with Hurricane Florence.
We have relatively high confidence that this could be a catastrophic flash flooding event. And before all is said and done there, we're probably measuring rainfall in feet across parts of eastern North Carolina.
This storm has the potential to be life-changing.
And the east coast of the crosshairs as Hurricane Florence barrels its way west. We're going to talk about the threat, storm surge, flooding, damaging winds. Hello and welcome to our special coverage. Tracking Florence, I'm meteorologist Ray Stagey.
And I'm meteorologist Nick Walker. Hurricane Florence, it's a monster storm, currently a Category 4, winds of 140 miles per hour. And millions of people are bracing for Hurricane Florence. There is the path that we anticipate right now Florence to take. Off toward the northwest, and then where does it go? Does it make landfall there near Wilmington? Does it make landfall a little farther toward the south, South Carolina? Even Georgia could be in play here. We're looking at the possibility of a major hurricane making landfall somewhere here along the Carolina shores, and then flooding rain as it slows down its progress once it moves inland. So, Ray, give us more now on what Florence is looking like.
Well, from the Hurricane Center, Nick, looking like it looked with their latest advisory from what it looked from the previous one. The next one coming up at 5 a.m. Eastern time. Now, if there are changes to the forecast, usually at 5 a.m. you see changes, whether that's track or intensity. The intermediate advisories don't see as many changes. But new update due at 5 a.m. We'll certainly pass that along to you as quickly as we do get it. Satellite presentation right now looking maybe a little bit better organized as we're starting to see now. What we didn't see earlier, let's check out this side, the left or the west side and the southwest side of Florence. Yeah, you can see this. Deeper, colder cloud tops. That's what the red reflects, is the higher, colder cloud tops showing maybe a little better organization, strengthening, well, possible, but either way, we're at 946 millibars. We've been that way over the past 6 to 12 hours. 48 hours ago, we were at 969 millibars. So lowering pressure means higher wind speeds, and that's why we've seen 105-mile-per-hour storm 48 hours ago, and that's why we have a 140-mile-per-hour storm now, because of lowering pressure means greater wind speed. 140-mile-per-hour winds at Cat 4, pressure 946, moving northwest at 17, 625 miles southeast of Cape Fear in North Carolina. And let's hope that we don't see too much more in the way of strengthening as the hurricane warnings are up. They get into now some of the beaches of South Carolina. Those warnings meaning within 24 hours, maybe a little bit longer, we could see hurricane conditions. Tropical storm watches and hurricane watches a little further inland within 36 to 48 hours. Tropical storm conditions could be as close as Raleigh, North Carolina. So some of these areas here continuing to have a threat from tropical storm force winds. Now, what we've seen with the latest runs, especially the European model, is everything's in pretty good agreement as it heads toward the coast. And then there's been some changes that may take a track either just offshore of North Carolina, possibly heading towards South Carolina, southwest direction. We're starting to see that show up in some of the model guidance. So I don't know if we're going to see adjustments to the forecast track, but that is at least a possibility, as some of the outliers and now some of the other models are coming into agreement to where, within the cone here of uncertainty, that's why we've got this variation right close to when we are expecting landfall sometime late Thursday night, Friday morning. So a strong Cat 3, maybe even a weaker Cat 4, which the difference really is going to be all that great. A very powerful storm heading close to shore as we get toward Thursday evening. And then notice right at that point how much wider that cone gets. So the center could be here, the center could be here, and the center could be even as far south as Charleston. So a lot of variation over the next 24 to 48 hours in where the center goes. Hopefully seeing a weakening storm as it comes onshore, but even further out over the upcoming weekend, even more variability to where the center of lowest pressure is going to be as a tropical depression by the weekend. But once again, watching this here in and around Friday evening time frame, where's the center going to be? Does it come onshore and meander around? Does it head further southwest, as some guidance is now suggesting? Nick?
Well, of course, wherever it goes, Hurricane Florence is taking aim at the southeast. People living near the coast in Virginia and the Carolinas have been ordered to find a safe place to ride out the storm. Hear the latest on their preparations.
For those living in the path of Hurricane Florence, the time to get out is running out.
We are in a very deadly and important game of chess with Hurricane Florence.
The massive Category 4 storm is packing 140-mile-per-hour winds. Forecasters say there could be more than 2 feet of rain near the coast. Mandatory evacuation orders have been issued in Virginia and the Carolinas. More than 1 million people are now trying to escape.
This storm is going to be intense, likely historic, and deadly. And we're asking people not to try to ride out a monster.
Near the coastline, gas stations are starting to run dry. Workers are filling up the final sandbags, while homeowners and business owners are putting up the last of the plywood.
Just hope that everything's still standing and it's not too much damage. But again, this is a very significant storm.
Residents now rushing to evade Florence's path. Both lanes of a South Carolina highway are being used to travel away from shore.
You never know with Mother Nature what's going to happen.
Florence is expected to arrive late Thursday. Dan Shanneman, NBC News.
All right, let's show you some places that will be affected by Florence and what we think right now those effects will be and when they could come. Take Wilmington, North Carolina, for instance. 40-mile-per-hour wind gusts from Thursday evening on through Saturday. Friday could see those hurricane-force wind gusts, 1 foot to 1.5 feet of rain, and up to 13 feet of storm surge. Dangerous place to be here in Wilmington, North Carolina. Myrtle Beach, not so good either. We could see those 40-plus mile-per-hour wind gusts Thursday evening into Saturday morning. Friday, 60-plus mile-per-hour gusts. 5 to 8 inches of rain could cause flooding, and up to 6 feet of storm surge could be a problem for coastal residents as well. Charleston, South Carolina, Saturday and Sunday could see those winds. Rain 3 to 5 inches, up to 4 feet of storm surge. And in Hatteras, North Carolina, we could see 60-mile-per-hour wind gusts Thursday evening on into Friday, and up to 6 feet of storm surge with up to 8 inches of rain. Lots of impacts for a lot of people here, Ray.
Yeah, that's right, Nick. And Wrightsville Beach, one of the areas that may have more significant impacts than others. Right now, all's calm, all's well. A tropical 77 degrees out ahead of our hurricane. But these is one of the areas that could see some of the highest storm surge. Thus, your storm surge warnings are in place right now. Storm surge watches as far north as Elizabeth City, as far south as Charleston. Now, if there's any adjustment to the forecast track, these watches and warnings may actually be adjusted. But still, with the wind and the waves coming onshore, there will be a high impact in terms of surge and surge flooding in many places. Right now, highest surge around Morehead City and areas west and northeast. 9 to 13 feet of surge, and that's the amount of water above ground level. So picture from the ground if you're standing, and then 9 feet above that to 13 feet. Further north a little bit less, but you still have to deal with these sounds, and then water trying to rush out of some of the tributaries trying to get into Pamlico Sound. So picture a hurricane trying to push water in while heavy rain's trying to flow out. Further south, Charleston, maybe a 2 to 4 foot water rise, but once again, if you do have any adjustment to a forecast tracker where the center comes on shore, that could change all that. Your wave heights getting up now to the 13-foot range from this buoy just on the west and southwest side of the center of Florence, and then these wave heights will continue to increase as we go on through this afternoon and the nighttime hours and into Thursday. Notice now we're getting into some of the 15 to 20-foot breakers as we watch Florence make its approach as we get into Thursday morning. Center's still offshore, but some of those waves getting up to the 15 to 20-foot range. And then as we get into Thursday afternoon and Thursday night, this is when some of the highest waves will start to be realized and increasing, Nick, as we head on through Thursday night and into Friday. So very good satellite presentation right now with Florence as it rolls northwest.
And with storm surge such a serious threat, we want to delve into that a little bit more detail with our hurricane expert, Dr. Rick Knabb, showing us what to expect in the coming days.
Storm surge watches and warnings have been up, evacuation instructions have been issued, and here is why you need to evacuate. We need to be afraid of water. Let's take a look at what storm surge flooding actually looks like and what it can do. Even when you don't get to the 3-foot threshold of life threatening, 1, 2, or 3 feet of storm surge flooding can be highly problematic and dangerous because 6 inches of water can take you off your feet. 1 or 2 feet of water can wash a car off the roadway, and it can even cause power to go out. But when you get to that life-threatening threshold of 3 feet, things really change. And this is the threshold that storm surge watches and warnings are focused on, 3 feet or greater, because the water will be moving. It can have debris, trees, floating objects that can injure you, and you don't even know all that is in the water, and the water can be halfway up your front door at that point, or maybe even close to getting over your head. It's definitely in over your head once you get to the 6 to 9 foot threshold. This could be above the first floor of your home. Major damage, and it can not only get into buildings, it can destroy buildings. And the storm surge is not just a beachfront problem. It can extend not only blocks, but miles inland. So if you haven't already been told to evacuate, and if you haven't already gone, find out right now if you live in an evacuation zone, decide where you go and how to get there. Consider special needs, where you're going to take shelter. If you're in a safe place, be someone's evacuation destination. And if you're instructed to leave, you go right away. And don't vertically evacuate in a high rise. Get out of the storm surge warning areas.
Lots of great advice, lots of things to think about, and lots of areas where we need to be thinking such things, including here in Virginia Beach, Virginia. Looking pretty calm there right now, no problems, but you know, that picture doesn't really paint the forecast, does it? I mean, just the current conditions. A forecast that could be rainy, windy, and with that water rise. Not a lot in the way of wind out there right now. We're just seeing, you know, 7, 8, 9 mile per hour sustained winds. But the timing of the tropical storm force winds will be such that once Thursday morning arrives, we could begin to see those over a widespread area here from Norfolk all the way down toward Wilmington, Charleston, and well inland too. There's at least a 50% chance of seeing tropical storm force winds. Here is what we anticipate as far as the graphically showing the likelihood of this. We're talking about 80, 90% of chance of seeing tropical storm force winds in that area. But look how big the area is where we actually have some chance of finding tropical storm force winds. And then the hurricane winds also show a widespread area too from what is really a large storm. So we'll be watching Florence obviously as we head on into Thursday and Friday and seeing those possible winds on the increase, tropical storm and then hurricane force winds as well. Notice the winds as we get toward Thursday afternoon, Thursday evening, and then coming on shore here sometime into the morning hours of Friday, but maybe even the storm taking a turn toward the south. That's a little, fly in the ointment that we're watching right now. Ray?
All right, Nick, and we've got the wind threat. There's a flood threat, too, and one of the places that could see a little bit more in the way of flooding could be the eastern Carolinas and eastern South Carolina. Right now, we're in Maui, Hawaii, where we're seeing some calm conditions, but impacts from Olivia could be felt there over the next couple of days. So heavy rain there, heavy rain and a flood threat out in through parts of eastern North Carolina. This is where we are going to see some of the heaviest rainfall, and some of that heavy rain continues to come in now. Out across Wilmington, it's very likely that we are going to see some flash flooding. Even further inland toward Raleigh, it's at least possible. Now, this is just through Friday morning, so some of this flooding may actually adjust and move around if we get heavier rain down into parts of eastern South Carolina, which is a possibility. We may see the potential for more flooding because look at this. This is through Tuesday now. 12 to 18 inches possible around Charleston and at least this part of eastern South Carolina. The heaviest 2 feet plus in and around Wilmington. But once again, this is through Tuesday, and that flooding graphic was only through Friday. So we may even see some flooding inland as we watch low pressure and maybe a depression hang around for a couple of days and into next week in some of these areas. All right, so here is what you need to know about the rainfall potential. As we said, into early next week. Locations of greatest rainfall depends on the exact track. Any changes to that would change who's going to get the heaviest rain and the best and the most significant flooding. Catastrophic flooding in some locations. Some areas could see flooding with only a few inches of rain, and then flooding from rivers could occur even after the rain stops. Nick?
Well, there's tropical troubles in the Pacific as well, and we're watching. Yeah, saying ain't so, but once again, we're watching Hawaii. A live look at Maui right now, where we have 12 mile per hour sustained winds and 76 degrees, but we could see those winds on the increase, maybe even to tropical storm force here in the coming hours as Tropical Storm Olivia makes its forward progress toward the Hawaiian Islands. And Maui, you're among those that very well could see the brunt of Olivia's fury. 50 mile per hour winds in the center of Olivia, moving toward the southwest at 8 miles per hour right now. And of course, it's not nearly as organized on the satellite picture as Florence, but there is enough organization to keep it a tropical storm as it moves across the islands. Thus, all of the islands here, the entire state of Hawaii, under a tropical storm warning. Here's what the models are indicating as far as the movement of this. Still off toward the southwest and then making its westward movement out over open water. So these central islands here, Maui, Molokai, probably the greatest threats of tropical storm force winds will be there. And we think there's going to be some heavy rain accompanying this as well. It will continue to weaken as it moves out over the water and off toward a westward movement. As far as the rainfall is concerned, here are the amounts that we can anticipate. Okay, not the kind of rain we saw from Lane, but maybe as much as 3 to 5 inches here on parts of Maui, parts of Oahu could see that, including the Honolulu Honolulu area as well. We're like 1 to 2 inches there on the Big Island, right?
Nick, and the next area we are going to watch is this area of interest here in the Gulf of Mexico over the next 5 days. A 70% chance of becoming a depression and or a tropical storm. The increasing chances here is going to bring more heavy rain into Texas. That chance of developing will continue to increase over the next couple of days. We're going to take a closer look at what that can mean. That's going to be coming up, and multiple crews out in the field covering Florence right on through the weekend.
right, welcome back as we continue to track Hurricane Florence. Here's what we know at this hour. Atlanta Motor Speedway has opened up camping facilities to Florence evacuees. A lot of folks headed that way. And Kentucky and West Virginia are offering discounted rates on lodging at state parks for people seeking shelter. Now, South Carolina is opening up an additional 4,500 shelters for evacuees. There are hundreds of them, and Facebook has turned on its community help feature to assist in the recovery needs. All right, a lot of things to watch now and a lot of things to watch after the landfall coming from Florence as well. Here's the latest, and this is as of the 2 a.m. advisory. We're going to get another advisory, hopefully here within the next half hour, 45 minutes or so. We'll be watching Hurricane Florence, and we'll see if the winds have come up a little bit. The satellite presentation is looking a little bit clearer here, a little bit more organized, but right now still a Category 4 hurricane with 140-mile-per-hour winds, a central pressure unchanged at 946 millibars, and a west-northwest movement at 17 miles per hour. Hurricane warnings are up all along the North Carolina shores, even down toward Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. Hurricane watches to the north and south of that, and they go well inland too. So we could very well see these tropical storm and hurricane winds even well inland from the coastal regions. Here's the best chance forecast we've got right now, okay? That we're going to see some strengthening, maybe to near Category 5 strength, and then making landfall sometime as we get through the night Thursday, through the day Friday, and slowing down the movement here as it does make landfall, but probably still as a major hurricane. Then it really slows down and continues a flood threat with heavy rain falling Saturday and Sunday evening. So all the way through the weekend, we could see heavy rain, and even far west as Jackson, Knoxville, and Atlanta. So it is really going to be a big-time rain event inland, as well as a wind and surge event there on the coastline. There are the models, and they're showing some discrepancy here right along the coast as to where landfall might actually take place, but of course even more discrepancy once it moves inland about where it might go from there. So a lot of things bear watching. A lot of things are still up in the air. The jury's out, really, on Florence as far as its movement. So the past 48 hours, we've seen that strength maintain the Category 4 strength. Will it go higher? We'll be watching for the 5 o'clock advisory. So, Ray, a lot of things really left up in the air at this point.
Yeah, and right at the wrong time, too, right before landfall. So we'll see what kind of changes, if we get any, with the 5 a.m. advisory. Thanks, Nick. Right now, I just want to take a look at the size of Florence. And National Weather Service out of Cleveland, Ohio, put this out. 4 states of Ohio. At least when they last checked, that's how big it was. That wind field also pretty expansive, too. So we're looking at a pretty big storm in terms of its diameter. So the wind field, obviously, within that diameter, tropical storm force winds and even a little bit smaller hurricane force winds. But as of latest check, a 351 mile per hour or 351 mile across or diameter storm. So large storm and continue to move on off toward the north and west. And those tropical storm force winds extend out pretty large, so 351 miles out. Hurricane force winds a little bit smaller here, as you would expect, as right around the center of that storm and within a few miles of that center. So you take the hurricane force wind field and spread it out over 120 miles. That covers up to 5 boroughs of New York City, parts of Nassau and Suffolk County, Long Island, extreme southwest Connecticut, even parts of southeastern New York State and North Jersey. So pretty expansive hurricane force wind field. And if you put that over Washington, D.C., easily covering up the district and surrounding areas into parts of Chesapeake Bay. So a large wind field of 74-plus miles per hour, easily covering up some major metropolitan areas. Same thing for Atlanta. It would easily cover up the suburbs, north, south, east, and west with that 120-mile-per-hour diameter wind field, those 74-plus mile-per-hour winds. Now, obviously, right in the core, the center where it's calm, you would see that. But still, a pretty large wind field here for in terms of hurricane force winds with Florence, and the tropical storm force winds, Nick, expand out even further than that.
Well, there's a lot more tropical moisture that we're watching, and Corpus Christi, Texas, likely to get some of that here in the coming days. You certainly have seen those downpours here overnight tonight, and even some flash flood warnings in the vicinity of South Texas. We got to watch South Texas because Invest 95L, as the National Hurricane Center is calling it, could very well become a tropical depression or tropical storm here in the coming days. Matter of fact, the National Hurricane Center is giving it a 70% chance of doing just that in the next 5 days. A 50% chance of that happening actually in the next 48 hours. This is the area to watch, and so all eyes here on the Gulf Coast need to keep a close eye on this Invest area because we very well could have maybe Tropical Storm Joyce or Kirk would be the next name as well. So we're looking for heavy rainfall no matter what we get. We're still going to see tropical rain from this. 3 to 5 inches over a widespread area, including Corpus Christi. So there could be some flash flooding throughout this region, and that's a possibility here from Corpus Christi, even on up toward Galveston and inland toward Houston, even into portions of southern Louisiana. We could see that flash flood threat as well. So rain and thunderstorms, that's what we have seen today around the area. Tomorrow, more rainfall saturating the ground, and then if this develops, we could see more tropical rain coming in from this entity.
Well, not expecting the best. We've as a family, we've sat through every storm down here so far. This one I don't have as good a feeling about, so we're taking extra measures and trying to keep everybody safe and trying to protect the properties. Yeah, I'm hoping for the best.
And the East Coast and the crosshairs as Hurricane Florence barrels its way west. We're going to be talking about the threats of storm surge, flooding, damaging winds. Thanks for staying with us on our special coverage of Tracking Florence. I'm meteorologist Ray Staging.
And I'm meteorologist Nick Walker. Thanks for joining us. And Hurricane Florence is a monster, currently a Category 4, winds of 140 miles per hour. As time runs out to prepare for Hurricane Florence, workers busy. This is downtown Wilmington, North Carolina yesterday. Storefronts getting covered in plywood, and the business owners there hoping for the best as Florence closes in. Florence still holding its Cat 4 strength. Now for the latest, here's Nick. And we're still awaiting the 5 o'clock advisory. We'll probably get it sometime before 5 o'clock here. But we're going to find out if there's any strengthening from this, because it is looking a little bit healthier on its satellite presentation. Still a Category 4, 140 mile per hour winds as of the 2 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time advisory. Its location at that time was 625 miles southeast of Cape Fear, North Carolina. And its movement toward the west-northwest at about 17 miles per hour will bring those hurricane force winds to the Carolina shores, we think, by the time we get into, say, overnight Thursday on into Friday night. And even inland, too, we're looking at the possibility of some of those hurricane force winds, too. So hurricane warnings up from Myrtle Beach all the way up to Kill Devil Hills, North Carolina. Here is the path that we anticipate seeing Florence make. This is our best scenario that we have right now. And pretty straightforward there off toward the northwest, but then before it makes landfall, where does it go from there? Does it go a little farther toward the south, as some of the new model runs are suggesting, or does it just go straight inland there in North Carolina or South Carolina? Well, no matter what we see, we very well could see heavy rainfall from this, and we're going to be watching for lots of rainfall here as we head on into Thursday night, because we're going to find that that really slows down, and that is going to increase the rainfall amounts. So lots of problems as we head on into the weekend here, Ray.
Yeah, Nick, and one area that could be getting hit pretty hard, downtown Wilmington, North Carolina. We'll take a look right now. Sunrise a few hours away, but 75 degrees and fairly calm. We don't expect it to stay that way, as within the next 24 to 36 hours, deteriorating conditions. First, with tropical storm force winds, and then the potential for hurricane force winds, and certainly a water rise here with storm surge warnings now all up and down the coast of North Carolina, even into South Carolina. A watch further north on the North Carolina-Virginia border and down near Charleston. The watch meaning that the potential for a high storm surge within 48 hours. So this is all going to depend on the current forecast track. And these watches and these water rises are based upon your current forecast track, which brings the center pretty close to the southeast North Carolina coast, so around Morehead City and even around Wrightsville Beach. These are the areas where we could expect a 9 to 13-foot water rise, and that's above ground level. So if you're in the warning area, picture the water being 9 to 13 feet above where the ground stands. So certainly going to be a high water rise even onto the Outer Banks and through Pamlico Sound. We do have some problems there with Highway 12, which will most likely, with this scenario, be water covered. Now, your wave height forecast also of importance, as your highest swells will start working in as we go through probably later Wednesday night to Thursday morning, starting to see some of these 15 to 20-foot breakers as the storm approaches. So as Florence approaches, obviously you expect not only the battering waves, but also the rise in water and the increase in wind speeds as we move on through noontime on Thursday. So that's when we'll start to see some of the highest wave heights. Winds right now really remaining fairly calm, gusts to 11 miles per hour out in this buoy, but less than 10 miles per hour in the coastal areas. So really not expecting to see those winds pick up till maybe later on Wednesday and into Thursday. Your tropical storm force wind probabilities are best in through parts of North and South Carolina. That's where the highest chance is, but even some slight chances even further inland, Nick, as the wind threat and the rain threat continues to move inland. And that's really where we're going to see the most variations of the forecast, I think, from right about near landfall and beyond.
Yeah, and over a widespread area, we think there's going to be some heavy rain as well that could cause some flash flooding. Thursday morning into Friday morning, there's the timeline where we're probably going to be very likely seeing some flash flooding there on the North Carolina coast, and then we'll see that rain move inland, and the flash flood threat will be on the increase a little farther inland. Here's the kind of rain amounts that we're looking at right now. This is according to the European model, and notice the timeline from Thursday through Tuesday. So we talk about this slowing down and just continuing to pour rain over this area. We could see the most right there near the Carolina shores, up to 2 feet of rain. But even around Charleston, we might very well get as much as 1 foot to 1.5 feet of rainfall there. Back into Georgia, 5 to 8 inches of rainfall, and up into the mountains there of western North Carolina and South Carolina and Georgia, 8 to 12 inches of rain there in the higher country as they just continue to wring out a lot of moisture. The locations of the greatest rainfall, of course, will depend on the exact track. Catastrophic flooding is expected in some locations, as well as catastrophic river flooding in the days to come. Wouldn't you just love to ride with the Air Force Reserve Hurricane Hunters and get this view? I tell you what, I know some people who have, and it's just, they say it's incredible. This is what it looks like as they flew over Hurricane Florence, and I tell you, it's a great view. It's a little bumpy ride sometimes, and we're very thankful for both sets of hurricane hunters, not only the U.S. Air Force hurricane hunters out of Biloxi, Mississippi, but also the NOAA hurricane hunters out of Lakeland, Florida. They've been flying missions into Hurricane Florence off and on and sort of trading off to give us information that will help put together a forecast and also give us the real-time information as far as the winds and the central pressure. Winds in the last advisory at 2 a.m. was 140 miles per hour, and the pressure 946 millibars. It's still moving toward the west-northwest at about 17 miles per hour. There is the movement of the Hurricane Hunter flight. This is a NOAA Hurricane Hunter flight out of Lakeland, Florida, right there. So they're getting ready to fly into this crisscross pattern that they normally do here into a tropical storm or a hurricane. And as they do, they're going to be dropping what they call dropsondes into the hurricane so they can get measurements of the wind speed and the pressure. And then there's other things that they do, other ways they get this information. This is the Air Force Hurricane Hunter plane, the WC-130J. And it's equipped with just an amazing instrument that I want to show you. This is attached right to the under the plane's wing, and it's called a stepped frequency microwave radiometer, or an SFMR. And here's how this thing works, and here's what it does. It's kind of wild to think about this. Sea foam and bubbles emit radiation. And so the SFMR receives that radiation, and it actually translates it into an estimated wind speed that we can use to plug into the models. More foam means higher wind speeds. So somebody thought of this and invented this amazing device that the hurricane hunters can use to give us the information that we need to make a good forecast. So thankful for the work of the hurricane hunters, both from the Air Force and from NOAA, and flying those planes, bumpy though they are, into and above the hurricanes, right?
Thanks, Nick. And another thing we'll have to worry about when we do get a closer approach, or as Florence gets closer to landfall, is our tornado threat. Severe thunderstorms possible as we go through tomorrow, anywhere in eastern North Carolina. And your TORCON, or your Tornado Condition Index, 3 out of 10 in eastern North Carolina. So 30% chance of tornadoes in any one given point in eastern North Carolina within a 50-mile radius. Now, here is a little bit of history on the types of tornadoes we get during landfalling tropical systems. 49% of the time, EF0s. 32% of the time, EF1. So weak tornadoes, but it is very rare that you get a strong tornado, because down there, 0% of the time you get an EF5. I guess that's as rare as it gets. So it's usually quick moving and quick spin-ups, most associated with supercells, occurring as the system comes on shore. And as I said, typically weak, shallow, short-lived, so it can cause damage. But they're most likely in the northeastern quadrant of the landfalling hurricanes, and the land interaction playing a role with some of those frictional forces helping these things spin up. So on the northeast side of Florence, depending on where that is the Carolina coast or further south, that's where we'll look for the tornado threat. You throw on top of that the heavy rainfall, you throw on top of that hurricane force winds and tropical storm force winds. Yeah, that's why the northeast quadrant of these systems is the most dangerous part of the storm, because you got the water rise coming in with that too, with that northeast flow, and that's certainly going to have impact along the beaches of the Carolinas too. So this is certainly something we're going to have to look out for as we go through the next 24, 36 hours. If any type of watch for severe weather, severe storms and or tornadoes needed in addition to any of the watches for hurricanes, that's certainly something that we are going to want to look out for. Well, now we want to answer some of your questions coming in about Florence. Many of you have been sending them via social media on Twitter using the hashtag Hurricane Questions.
And here's one that we received, and we really want to get into this because Wendy says the World Equestrian Games start in Tryon, North Carolina on Wednesday. What should our guests from other countries and the spectators be doing right now? And Ray, you were telling me that thousands of people come to this event.
Yeah, I get a number of 400,000, maybe 500,000 additional people coming into town. And, you know, they may not have experience being World Equestrian Games you know, what even an inland threat could be from a hurricane or a tropical storm or even a tropical depression at that point.
We've seen already a lot of football games canceled. We've seen concerts canceled onto the weekend. But beyond, beyond on into Wednesday, we still could find a flood threat in that area.
Yeah, and the likely area is eastern North Carolina, but there's equestrian events out in western North Carolina where in and around the Asheville area, we may see some heavy rainfalls here From this guidance from the Euro, we're looking at 8 to 12 inches of rain. That could certainly lead to some flooding.
Asheville's about 2,000 feet in elevation. Tryon is about 1,000 feet lower, so maybe not quite the impact that they would have higher up, but still an impact nevertheless.
Yeah, so certainly the advice we can give right now, if you are watching and you're from out of town or from out of the country, is you're going to want to stay tuned to the forecast. Know what the watches and warnings mean, too, as the language elsewhere in the world, Nick, is probably different. But as we go through Thursday and Friday and Saturday, not seeing much impact yet, but as we go further into the weekend, rain starts pushing further west, and by early next week, Sunday, Monday into Tuesday, depending on the track, we may have impacts.
Yeah, and river flooding could still be a problem too.
And if you have questions, we want them to hear from you. Send them in as needed.
You know, we actually really haven't had a hurricane in a long time. Not like a real hurricane, you know. So it's something new to me. This will be like my first major storm. I'm a little anxious, yeah, but it'll be all right, you know, hunker down, get everything prepared.
Yeah, the first time for everything, I guess, right? But you certainly don't want it to be a landfalling hurricane. Welcome back to our continuing coverage of Hurricane Florence. Meteorologist Ray Stajic with Nick Walker here at the Weather Channel. And we're going to get the 5 a.m. advisor here pretty shortly. He may actually pop in here while we're on air, but the latest from the Hurricane Center showing that we still had a Category 4 storm with winds at 140 miles per hour, pressure 946 millibars, continuing to move north-northwesterly at 17 miles per hour. And starting to see now, it looks like the storm is becoming even better organized. As you can see, those darker colors, the shades of maroon and even some purples getting in there now, showing where the higher, colder cloud tops are. Certainly a sign of a system that's well organized and forecast to strengthen a bit, and may actually be doing that right now. Thus, the hurricane warnings are up, meaning within 24 to 36 hours, hurricane conditions expected. Coastal North Carolina, even a little bit further inland now. Some of these watches and warnings are in effect. The hurricane warning extending a few counties inland. Tropical storm watches almost into Raleigh, but not quite yet, means within 48 hours we may experience tropical storm conditions in some of these areas. Now we're going to watch our forecast guidance here, and a little bit of change here. It's a little concerning, especially right near where we are expecting to see landfall. Now, are we going to have a storm that hangs just off the coast, comes into the Carolinas or North Carolina, then tries to back out? Well, potentially we would, but some guidance suggesting that we may have a track that takes it a little bit further southwest and possibly somewhere along the South Carolina coast. And at this point, I'd say even the Georgia coast may be in play, especially if we follow European guidance, where we do have some indications that we may see a track further southwest. But that all remains to be seen, as our track guidance typically is not as good in the longer range as our, let's say, intensity guidance. And that's why right here, this is where we start seeing those deviations to the southwest. And then certainly as it moves inland, look at this mess. European Ensemble forecast guidance suggesting that, you know, we may get that turn toward the southwest here, and then we could potentially see a storm that may impact parts of the Carolina coast, North and South Carolina. And as we said, the far left side of this cone even keeps coastal parts of extreme North Georgia or northeast or southeast Georgia in play. And then as you get inland, you really see the expansion, Nick, of that forecast track, or the cone of uncertainty, really expand, as there's a lot of variations in model guidance of what it's going to do.
A lot of things to watch here in the coming days. And this is really only one of 3 named storms in the Atlantic Basin. So we've got Florence, we've got Tropical Storm Isaac, and also we have Hurricane Helene. And then 2 other areas that we're watching too, the Invest 95L and a non-tropical low that could take on tropical characteristics here in the days to come. So let's talk about some of these. Tropical Storm Isaac with 60-mile-per-hour winds. This is the 5 a.m. advisory now that's come in. And the central pressure, 1,000 millibars, still moving toward the west at 15 miles per hour. And so we expect to see tropical storm force winds throughout the Lesser Antilles. Tropical storm warnings are up for many of the islands here, as this is expected to make its westward movement and probably stay clear, at least the center of the storm. At least that's our best guess right now, that it will stay clear of Puerto Rico, Hispaniola, and Cuba. But it doesn't mean that they won't be impacted at all. We're talking about waves, we're talking about rain. So nevertheless, it looks like the worst of those conditions right now appear that they will stay through the Caribbean, south of those bigger islands. Here's Invest 95L. This is an area that the National Hurricane Center is actually giving a 70% chance of development over the next 5 days. Winds of 30 miles per hour, the development area right here in the Gulf. So all the way from the Yucatan up toward Texas, we need to be watching this. Texas has already seen the coastal regions, heavy rainfall, even throughout the night tonight. And so the ground is saturated. There's going to be more where that came from. And through Sunday, the forecast is calling for 3 to 5 inches of rain over this South Texas area, and maybe even some areas, look at that, that could get 5 up to perhaps 8 inches of rain. So it is a wet forecast no matter how you slice it, and flash flooding is going to be a possibility, Ray.
All right, Nick, thanks. And we do have the latest now from the National Hurricane Center with a 5 a.m. advisory. And we do have some changes. Actually, the wind speed has been decreased 10 miles per hour to 130 miles per hour, but still a very powerful Category 4 storm. The pressure holding at 946 millibars and moving off to the west-northwest. So here's the change that we've had with this advisory from the Hurricane Center. Still a Cat 4 and a strong Cat 4. And right now, we don't know if that's a continuous drop in wind speed. Probably not, as the Hurricane Center is forecasting strengthening. And over the last few satellite pictures, it does look like we are seeing at least a little bit better organization as we watch Florence continue to move northwest. So Hurricane Center forecasting a re-strengthening to 145 storm now. Earlier would be 155, and maybe somewhere in here it does get stronger, but 120 as it gets close to landfall. Then the jury's out of where we're going to have in terms of forecast track. Notice right as we approach land and the Carolina coast, this is when we've got a huge amount of variability to where the center of lowest pressure goes or where the center goes with Florence. It could move as far south as maybe coastal South Carolina. It's still North Carolina in play.
Across the state, it's going to be flooding and the rivers damaging stuff, but here it'll be wind, down trees.
We're putting supplies in various places at an earlier time. Usually you wait until after the storm.
Even if you've ridden out storms before, this one is different. Don't bet your life on riding out a monster.
This morning, more than 1 million people evacuated as the potential storm of a lifetime approaches the U.S. coast. Millions are under hurricane warnings. But where will landfall happen? Our expert team of meteorologists is spread out across the southeast and in the studio as we track Hurricane Florence. Good morning and welcome into our continuing coverage of Tracking Florence. I'm meteorologist Stephanie Abrams alongside meteorologist Jim Cantori, who is in Wrightsville Beach, Jen Carfagno, who is in Myrtle Beach, and of course we have Dr. Greg Postel in studio. I am live in Wilmington, North Carolina. We are under hurricane warnings as Florence approaches the coast of the Carolinas. So let's give you the very latest with our update here, and we still have a very massive, major Category 4 hurricane moving towards the coast. And there's not much that could stop this as it approaches North and South Carolina. When will it approach? Well, you still have all day today to make sure you have the boards up, make sure you have the water. By the way, another good tip for you is make sure that your tub is filled with water. You can use buckets of that to flush your toilet. Little things like that will tell you along the way that we can help you out. But once it does get close to the coast, will it actually make landfall, or will it skirt south of the coast and come in South Carolina or Georgia? Those possibilities are still out there. Regardless, it's going to be moving very, very slowly. Look at this. By Thursday, just offshore, so you have Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, 4 days. This system is going to be sitting right in the same area. With that said, hurricane warnings, tropical storm watches extending all the way inland to Fayetteville. Myrtle Beach, you are under those hurricane warnings. Hurricane watches south of there, stretching down towards Edisto Beach. By the way, when you have a warning of any type, that means those conditions within 48 hours, a warning is in 36 hours, a watch is in 48 hours. One of the things that you're really going to have to watch for is the flooding rain. That is going to be a significant story with this system. We could see over 2 feet of rain when all is said and done in eastern North Carolina. Something else you have to watch out for, erosion and surge. Jim is going to carry that angle from Wrightsville Beach. Good morning, Jim.
Yeah, good morning, Steph. I'm about 12 miles off to your east. We're off, of course, right on the beach here, which is going to be a ghost town as of about 8 o'clock tonight. The mayor wants this place completely shut down. Yesterday, it was just a mad dash to get boats out of the marinas and the bays and getting, of course, windows boarded up. Essentially, at where we're staying here at the blockade, they took everything off the first floor, as they are anticipating, the maximum surge, which could be anywhere from 6 to even 13 feet. So let's get into this. And remember, as I say this to you this morning, if you live on the Georgia coast, be ready for changes, potentially. All right, we may see things expanding down the coastline today as the confidence potentially grows with this maybe coming to the south. We may have not one, but maybe even 2 landfalls with this, or something that bounces off the coast. We'll talk more about that in just a minute. But you can see where the warnings are now. And you can see how far the watches extend down toward Hilton Head. All right, take a look at this wind forecast. This gives us a little tail of the tape as to exactly what we're going to deal with. They bring this buzzsaw, which, by the way, looks like it's developing more this morning from satellite, toward us. And as it comes toward us, winds are really going to increase, especially tomorrow morning. So about 24 hours, it's going to be all different out here. The air's almost dead. There's an occasional breeze that comes through. We just had a big thunderstorm down to our south. And notice how this thing just bounces off the coast on Friday night, roars its way down past Jen and Myrtle Beach, goes back down toward Charleston, and then, according to the European operational, comes in again on the coast of Georgia, which is just wild. So there's some really funky things going on with the steering, essentially from Friday into Saturday afternoon. And that's what makes places like Atlanta should kind of wake up this morning and realize that you're in the cone. You're going to be dealing with this. All right, so Wrightsville Beach, time of high tide will matter. We have about a 5-foot tidal change in what we've gotten through here. High tides are going to be around 11 and noon. Low tides are going to be, essentially this morning and then during the later morning hours. So again, depending on when all this comes in, that'll have a big deal as to how high that surge is, overall water rise in through here. And the highest water rise actually has a chance to be worse down to our south. So if this does come in and bend a little bit down to the south, look at places like Carolina Beach and Curry Beach. They're going to get absolutely crushed. So places like, Wilmington that you see with the storm surge after Matthew are going to be a lot different. They're going to be underwater here as a result of this. All right, Greg Postel, let's talk about this. This steering, as Florence comes west, it's clear as a bell right now. But once this gets to the coast, we still got a lot of different solutions potentially here.
Yeah, we do. And these kind of notions that the thing stalls and then parallels the coast and doesn't come inland maybe until later or makes 2 landfalls, all very concerning, because when you look at the satellite pictures right now, Jim, I want to show this because we're seeing a hurricane that is even probably strengthening over the last 12 hours. You see those dark reds and those magentas now completely encircling the eye. So there's some alarming trends on the satellite picture that it may even be getting stronger than where it is right now. But the track that everybody wants to know, this is the concerning part of it. Look how it kind of goes on that northwest path, doing its own thing. And then a lot of the guidance now, not one model, not 2 models, but like a lot of them do this very same thing. They kind of bring it up to the coast, move it slightly southwest, bring in all the hazards with a landfalling hurricane with it from North Carolina to South Carolina, and then westward and then inland. Now that, as I said, is not an outrageous scenario. When you look at the upper level steering pattern, which has been essentially the same over the last few days, but there have been some subtle hints that perhaps this blocking ridge of high pressure aloft in the atmosphere, the steering pattern, is actually going to change a little bit over the southeast U.S. So in other words, Florence, instead of going like that, it really can't. It's got nowhere to go. So instead, it'll probably do one of these things. So that option of going northwest, then stalling, then back southwest, entirely legit. And it's really sort of outlined by this forecast, for example, by the GFS. Now, a couple of days ago, actually, the GFS was on to some kind of these coastal gymnastics. It wasn't doing it down here, but it was up in here, kind of flirting it with the coast for a while, not really bringing it inland. Well, you know what? It might have been onto something, because now a lot of the guidance is doing something very similar, hugging Florence at a pretty strong intensity right near the coast and extending the impacts all the way southward into Georgia. So here's the Euro. Now, the Euro is on board with this as well. Now, going sort of northwest, maybe not even making an initial landfall, maybe in southern North Carolina, and then going southwestward. The impacts are going to change with this kind of scenario. Things will be shifting southward. So if indeed the models continue to advertise this weird behavior, do expect their watches and warnings to be extended southward toward the Carolina and Georgia coastline. As far as how much rain goes, Jen will be talking about this in just a little bit. She's up in Myrtle Beach, but I tell you what, a lot more rain may be showing up the maps down here and perhaps less up there. This is a very fluid situation. Jen, I'm going to send it over to you in Myrtle Beach, talking about the rainfall potential there. Jen.
Yeah, I mean, Greg, it's very alarming that we have such the potential for a slow-moving hurricane that may make several landfalls, actually keeping that tropical connection. So flooding rain. We know that when it comes to hurricanes, it is the water that is the leading cause of fatalities, whether it's surge or whether it's inland flooding. That is what you need to be afraid of, and that's the reason for the evacuations. I'm here in Myrtle Beach, where zones A, B, and C all went under a mandatory evacuation yesterday, and it went well. Let me show you actually the scenes of what happened out here yesterday as we saw that evacuation go. Contraflow started as well, meaning all lanes of I-26 went westbound. So state troopers made sure that all lanes of 26 flew westbound between Charleston and Columbia. Traffic in the countryside moved smoothly, as you can see, but once drivers hit Columbia, they got stuck in about a 5-mile backup. All right, so let's talk more about the rainfall that we are concerned about with Florence. I'm here in Myrtle Beach, where we've actually had a couple of showers this morning. Actually, you can see behind me on the boardwalk here in the Grand Strand, we do have some wet boardwalk. Here's a look at the forecast coming our way. So what we're getting now is just, scattered showers. We're going to get the rainfall tomorrow from Florence. And, of course, depending on exact track, it could start early in the morning, but it may wait until later in the day, depending on the timing and how much it slows down. 5 to 6 inches of rain right now in the Myrtle Beach area based on the latest track. You go down and you go up, I should say, into North Carolina. And we know that with the core of Florence and around that, donut, around that eye wall is going to be a core of very heavy rain and rainfall rates. That's where we could easily pick up more than a foot of rainfall. We may be talking more than 2 feet of rainfall. And then, of course, when you bring in surge in that, too, there's a very big risk for water right there, especially on the coast, but also inland. Now, timing-wise, we've got Thursday night, we've got rainfall right through the weekend, and honestly, this slow track and this meandering track is very concerning when it comes to the risk of flooding because of that. The Weather Prediction Center has already put out a high risk for excessive rainfall, for days 2 and 3 in their forecast. That doesn't happen very often. In fact, I've never seen it 2 days in a row like this. And so we know that's significant because they don't issue that many of these high-risk days every year. There's only a handful of them. On those high-risk days, those are the days that we get significant and expensive flood damage, and we're very concerned about that, of course, with Florence. Now, let's talk, Steph, city by city and talk about some impacts and work on timing based on what we know right now.
Yeah, so right now we're going to start here in Wilmington where people are preparing. We saw a lot of people definitely boarding up. We went in a store yesterday. He said he was going to stay open yesterday. He was going to come back, perhaps today and do that boarding up. Governor Roy Cooper has ordered evacuations along the coast. We are not under evacuations here in Wilmington. We're going to talk about those a little bit later and if you should or shouldn't evacuate. Stores selling out of gas, food, all those sorts of supplies, and reports of gas being sold out as far as Raleigh. That's 129 miles northwest of here.
It's a little bit of a panic right now. Everything is, it does carry on, and it should be somewhat of a panic. But everyone's preparing. It seems like half and half. Some are staying, the other half are leaving. My family's in Florida right now. My brother's family, he's on his way up to Rhode Island, and they're flying, the other half of the family. So I'm the only one here sticking it out. My neighbors are gone, but I have other neighbors that are going to stick it out. So, but they're preparing for it. So I hope nothing happens.
So the biggest impact I think we're going to see here in and around the Wilmington area, especially if that eye wall, listen, that eye wall, that's what will get you. That's the killer. If that eye wall stays offshore here in Wilmington along the Cape Fear River, we are going to see just tremendous amounts of rain. And we're going to walk around and show you what that's going to do to this area a little bit later. Hatteras, you're also going to see that rain and surge, right? Being right there on the water, up to 6 feet of surge there. It's a Thursday, Friday, into Saturday thing. Remember, it slows down. So that's why the rainfall is going to be horrific. Wilmington, 12 to 18 inches of rain. And you have to watch, again, along the Cape Fear River, depending on where exactly that storm sets up. Does the water push up the river or does it push out the river? It depends on what the wind direction is. And as we take you into Wilmington, our top water rise is going back to 2016, just about 3.5 feet. The tides, we also are going to have to take that into consideration. Myrtle Beach, you are going to see, again, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, even into Sunday morning. Here's some of those evacuation orders for South Carolina, and they go from Myrtle Beach down into Charleston. If you are told to evacuate, evacuate. If you are not told, then do not evacuate. And evacuate when you're told so we don't run into problems that are on the roads. Charleston, South Carolina, it's a Saturday, Sunday thing for you. We could see that surge up to 4 feet. Jen, I'm going to send it back to you.
All right, Steph, here. Certainly people are hustling to evacuate and to make their preparations complete today here in the Carolinas. Now, officials are warning people that they should not try to ride out the storm. And new this morning, FEMA Administrator Brock Long predicts that Florence could be the most dangerous storm in the history of the Carolinas. 1.5 million people on the move, escaping before Florence traps them.
This is our only vacation this year. We're having to head back today.
This is a very significant storm.
I'm just stressed out to the max thinking, am I going to have a home to come back to?
You never know with Mother Nature what's going to happen.
People jammed home improvement stores for plywood on Tuesday. One final day to board up. One final day to fill sandbags.
We are in a very deadly and important game of chess with Hurricane Florence.
North Carolina's governor predicts Florence will be
intense, likely historic, and deadly. And we're asking people not to try to ride out a monster.
This sign on the Outer Banks marks previous hurricanes. Floyd's storm surge, 12 feet in 1999. Hazel at 17 in 1954. Florence promises a similar wall of water, but even so, some won't leave.
We're just going to stay and stick it out.
We have our supplies, you know, the water, the bread, everything that we need just in case we lose power.
I had the money to buy the extra stuff to stay, but I didn't have the money to leave.
And, you know, certainly Myrtle Beach has seen impacts from their fair share of hurricanes, but we've never had a direct hit right here in Myrtle Beach. There's the potential for Florence to be the first. All right, Steph, I'll send it back to you.
Jen, it could be a direct hit for several cities along the southeast coast. Let's talk about what we know this hour. President Trump has approved requests for federal funding for the governors of North and South Carolina. Classes will be canceled starting at 5 p.m. today at Duke and USC, with students at UNC being urged to leave Chapel Hill before the storm hits. The campus is closed and classes are canceled at the University of South Carolina. We have live team coverage spread all throughout the southeast, from the coast all the way inland. We're going 24 hours a day live here on the Weather Channel for the extended period. Hours a day live here on the Weather Channel for the extended period.
Just hope that everything's still standing and there's not too much damage. But again, this is a very significant storm.
I've lived here my whole life, and I can't recall having to evacuate like this.
And several areas that are being evacuated. If you look at the cone with this system coming in towards North Carolina, South Carolina, we are going to see, especially those coastal areas, under a mandatory evacuation. That's where, of course, you are going to really have to heed the warning. There are some areas that are under voluntary evacuation. So know your zone, vaemergency.gov. You know, and mainly those coastal areas are where you do have the mandatory evacuations in North Carolina, Craven, Dare, Hyde. You can see the list there of the counties where you have to evacuate. Voluntary evacuations a little bit farther inland. That's when they say, you know, it would be a good idea if you left. By the way, if you're in a mandatory evacuation and something really bad happens, there's a lot of times the police and the first responders will not come to your area. So keep that in mind. So here's a look from Conway to Marion, South Carolina. They have that lane reversal until further notice. So all the lanes will be going inland there. And then also on 26, Charleston to Columbia, South Carolina, also a lane reversal there until further notice. So you're going to have to take the side roads. Here's a look in South Carolina where we do have government closures. 18 counties until further notice under government closures. 8 counties reopened today, more in the southern portion of the state. So the reality is when it comes to evacuations, wait until they tell you to evacuate so we don't end up with a clogged issue on the roads, A. And then B, remember, Jim, I can't, you know, I've had it a lot of times, I'm sure you have had too, where the police will come up to us when we're covering a storm where there's been a mandatory evacuation. They say, okay, we've cleared everyone out. We're out. You're on your own. They don't say don't call us, but they say we might not be able to help you if you do call us.
Right, which for anybody on Wrightsville Beach, that's exactly what they're going to do, probably starting, you know, tomorrow as things go downhill. We'll be in tropical storm force winds more than likely here, right where I'm standing on Wrightsville Beach. All right, let's talk a little bit about why we need to pay a lot more attention to just this cone, because we're trying to get this point across that there's so many impacts outside the cone. This is a big hurricane. All right, if you look at the hurricane force wind field, it's 75 miles out from the center. So 75 times 2, you know, 150 miles. All right, or 70 miles, so 140 miles. The tropical storm force winds extend out 170 miles. So now you've got, you know, 325 in terms of the wind. Big, big wind field with this, both hurricane and tropical storm force. If you take a look at just the Atlanta area, now this is not going to be, you know, what it is right now by the time it kind of oozes up toward northern Georgia, but you're still talking about what could be some wind energy left over a very large area. So that coupled with, you know, certainly what has been kind of a wet summer, certainly could topple some trees. So we got issues in Atlanta, Georgia. I talked about that yesterday. Charleston, South Carolina, Savannah, Georgia. You'll notice again, you're in the cone actually. So, you know, not only will you see that type of wind potentially along the coast, some strong winds, but we also could certainly see more impacts even further inland and through here. So, guys, this is a dangerous hurricane. There's a lot of things unknown as to how much strength it has right at the coast. Does it come in? Does it kind of bounce along the coast or stay just off the coast so it can keep its intensity even a little bit longer? That's what the wind shows us, and you'll notice that wind pretty much takes us right outside the cone. So, Greg Postel, I want to talk a little bit about the storm surge. As this potentially does move south and southwest, which we do think it is going to do now, do you think there'll be needed additional storm surge watches or warnings even into along the Georgia coastline?
Yes, I do, Jim, and that's why you need to pay very close attention to the forecast, because we know that life-threatening inundation will accompany the landfall of Hurricane Florence, wherever that happens to be, and that may change going forward. But the current projections suggest that North Carolina will be at risk for a significant storm surge to the tune of these amounts all across the coastal area of North Carolina. Look at some of these numbers: blue up to 3, and then above 9 feet in red. Let's zoom in, for example, into the Neuse River. Look at how far inland this 9 feet of storm surge goes, 100 miles inland. It follows the tributaries and rivers and streams and creeks. This is not just a coastal phenomenon here, this storm surge flooding. But let's show you what it looks like using our augmented reality and what even, just for example, 1 to 3 feet of storm surge, which is very significant for what it looks like. There it is right there. Imagine that. 6 inches can stall out a car, right? 1 to 3 feet can certainly carry a car away and inundate parts of the first floor. And then going up beyond that, 3 to 6 feet. Imagine that. I'm almost 6 feet tall. That's generous. But that could certainly inundate the entire first floors we're talking about. So if you happen to be in a structure and caught in 3 to 6 feet of storm surge, you need to get to that second floor. And then above that, imagine this. 9 feet of storm surge that will completely inundate first floors. Things will be floating around in the water, serve as battering rams, add to the potential destruction of this. This is a life-threatening situation if you're anywhere near this kind of storm surge going forward. So again, pay attention to the latest forecast with Hurricane Florence because we just don't know yet exactly where it's going to be. And these kinds of storm surge conditions will depend exactly on where that landfall ends up. Steph, I'm going to send it back over to you in Wilmington, North Carolina.
All right, Postel, so not only do we have the surge, but then we have the rain that's on top of that surge. Not only at the coast, but places inland, as Postel was just showing you. So this is a far-reaching. Find out who's going to see perhaps a couple feet or more of rain after this break.
Welcome back to Tracking Florence. We are watching the latest advisory from the National Hurricane Center, and there it is. We are still dealing with a 140-mile-per-hour hurricane, Category 4, pressure somewhere in the mid-940 range. And the problem is it's continuing to move toward the west-northwest, getting ever closer to the southeast United States. Let's have a look at what it looks like now on the satellite pictures. Check this out, this three-dimensional view. Look at the depth of the cloud. These are tall thunderstorms now, completely wrapping around the eye. Storm tops well over 50,000 feet. This eye wall is where the most destructive of all the winds are in Hurricane Florence. And you need to stay updated on the forecast because the track is not set in stone. There will be some movements, we think, as we go forward, even during the next 24 to 36 hours. Steph, I'm sending it over to you in Wilmington, North Carolina.
All right, Dr. Posto, we appreciate that. And now we want to do is we want to answer some viewer questions. You guys have been sending them in to us. And the first viewer question that we want to show you guys here, it has to do with lightning. So the question comes from Todd. And Todd asks, I have hurricane question. Why don't you see a lot of lightning with hurricanes, like when you have severe weather in the Midwest? Like in Minnesota, we get a lot of lightning. And you know, Jim, you do actually sometimes see some lightning, but there's one main reason why we don't, and it has to do with temperature.
Warm core system. That's exactly right. It's very warm all the way up to the top. So you know, to get the thunderstorms up to a level where you've got the ice and whatnot is very difficult to do. But that does happen, Steph, like you mentioned, especially in the eye. I remember being in Gordon just a week and a half ago. We had lightning all galore in that western eye wall. It was cranking out the lightning. So it's about lapse rates, certainly in the Midwest, where you're talking about colder temperatures with height getting up to the freezing layer a lot quicker. That doesn't necessarily happen with a tropical system, but it can happen in the eye wall, and we have seen that, usually portending to a storm that's actually strengthening.
All right, great. Thanks for your expertise, Jim. Let's go to Jen now to talk more about our city impacts. She's live in Myrtle Beach this morning. Jen.
Yeah, so Steph, you know, I'm really concerned about this angle of impact coming in potentially to North Carolina or even South Carolina. I'm in Myrtle Beach. It's an unusual angle, right? It's going to be coming in directly towards the coast, perpendicular to the coast, as opposed to at an angle or paralleling the coast. So let me talk about Myrtle Beach specifically since I'm here and the water rise that could occur because of that. So, you know, we look at our past hurricanes. Just take Matthew. We go back 2 years, and Matthew really sort of went overhead and paralleled the coast, and we did see, actually, it's third on the list from Matthew in our top water rises, October 8th, 2016, and that was 2 3/4 foot water rise. But again, we didn't have that direct angle of approach. So we know that the specific track is still yet TBD to be determined. If we were to get in that right front quadrant, and if it were to make a landfall directly towards us here in Myrtle Beach, it would be a significant water rise like we've never seen before. Let's look at Myrtle Beach specifically, actually, and talk about that. Surge could be up to 6 feet. Again, that's worst case scenario. That would be at the time of high tide, which for tomorrow is a little after 10 a.m. and 10 p.m. or 11 a.m. and 11 p.m. But certainly that is the potential. We'll have to watch that every single day. Now, in terms of wind right now, based on the latest track, wind gusts will be in excess of 60 miles per hour, with Friday being the peak day for that wind. But if this thing meanders right off the coast, if it stays energized, those wind gusts could persist for longer than that rainfall, about 5 to 8 inches. And when it comes to rainfall, we really are tracking the core of the hurricane to bring that heaviest of rainfall. In fact, we'll take it up into North Carolina, where, you know, we've got 2-foot rainfall totals in the forecast. This is a forecast you don't see very often, right? This is significant. We know it's not just about the heavy rain at the coast, but it's the inland flooding and it's the river flooding. And it's honestly the surge flooding that will happen as water gets pushed up the rivers here that feed out into the Atlantic Ocean. If you've got a system that's stalled right off the coast, that's continuing to push water onshore and then up the river, there's no way for that rainfall to come down, fill the rivers, and then get back out into the ocean. So that's a big concern. Wilmington, I'll give you some specifics here. In terms of impacts, we could see starting tomorrow the rainfall, the outer bands start to come in, extending through at least Saturday. Jim, we know it could be longer, of course, depending on the track. And storm surge in Wilmington could be up to 13 feet, again, a worst case scenario. Jim, it's just a really odd angle, don't you think, in terms of trying to give a parallel of something that's happened before as an example, especially for me here in Myrtle Beach. Yeah.
Jen, I can't remember what day it was that we were talking on MHQ about, showing where Florence was and the fact that we never had a landfalling East Coast system in the position that it was. And now we're talking about what is going to be something that is not only going to landfall potentially once, but twice or more. So really, really odd. You're absolutely right about that. So guys, we're going to talk more about this rainfall and the surge and, of course, the wind that's with this, the strange track that pushes it to the southwest.